At 30 years old, Steve Jobs was fired from Apple. Not failed, fired. The company he started told him he was the problem. In his own words, he became a very public failure. Most people would have been broken by that kind of rejection. But for Steve Jobs, this moment wasn't the end. It was the event that quietly rewired everything. Because the truth is, Apple didn't become a trillion-dollar company in spite of Steve Jobs being fired. It became one because he was. This is the story of how his greatest failures became his most valuable assets. Before the comeback, there was a deeply flawed leader. In the early 1980s, Steve Jobs was undeniably brilliant, but notoriously difficult to work with. His obsession with perfection was extreme, uncompromising, and often disconnected from reality. The world would later call this vision. At the time, they called it unbearable. That obsession produced the Apple Lisa, a computer far ahead of its time. It was slow, it had almost no software, and the price tag, nearly $10,000. Then came the Macintosh. Inside the company, tensions were rising fast. Jobs had personally recruited John Sculley as CEO and soon found himself in a power struggle with the man he brought in. Steve tried to force Sculley out. It was a gamble, and he lost. The board didn't back the visionary founder. They backed the CEO. Steve Jobs was stripped of all operational power, humiliated, isolated, and eventually, he resigned from the company he'd started in his parents' garage. Apple moved on, and Steve Jobs was out. But he wasn't done. After leaving Apple, Steve Jobs didn't take a break. He started a new company called Next, determined to prove Apple wrong. His focus was simple: build a powerful computer for universities and businesses. The result was a sleek black cube, the Next computer. It looked impressive. It was technically advanced, but it was too expensive, and hardly anyone bought it. Once again, Jobs was ahead of the market, and alone. At the same time, Jobs bought a small graphics company called Pixar. But Pixar struggled too. It kept losing money, and Jobs kept paying to keep it alive. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about survival. By the early 1990s, he was stuck, trying everything and getting nowhere. The man who helped start the personal computer revolution looked like he was being left behind by it. Failure didn't end Steve Jobs. It changed him. The years away stripped him down. They humbled him. They taught him restraint. They changed how he thought about people, creativity, and control. Then, quietly, something worked. Pixar finally broke through. Almost overnight, Steve Jobs wasn't forgotten anymore. Soon after, Apple called him back. He returned different, and the worst years were over. The Steve Jobs who came back in 1997 wasn't the same man who had been pushed out. In 1998, he introduced the iMac, bright, bold, different. It wasn't just a computer, it was a statement. Apple was back. What he learned from failure reshaped the company. Hardware and software worked as one. Design came first. People came before technology. Then came the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, all shaped by the man those years had changed. Later, Jobs would say that being fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to him. His story reminds us of something simple. Failure isn't the opposite of success. Sometimes, it's what makes success possible. Steve Jobs didn't avoid failure. He let it reshape him. And because of that, he helped build Apple as we know it today. So here's the question. If Steve Jobs had never been fired, do you think Apple would exist the same way? Yes or no? Tell me why in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about identity, collapse, and comebacks, subscribe to the Imaginarium.